Welcome, everyone.
Popular, James. All trainers are. It's up to you.
Oh, yeah, I think it's the topic rather than the presenter. Okay.
Uh,
Right,
no.
we'll get started. So first of all, thank you so much to Katie and James for inviting me back. It's always a good sign when people ask you to come back and don't ignore you for the rest of life. So my name is James. For those of you who don't know, which is probably all of you actually, I am a physiotherapist working down in Devon, but I know Katie and James very well from my time living and running lots up in Milton Keynes and the Midlands areas. So yeah, we've kind of gone back pre the running hub days, I think, actually, which seems like a hell of a long time ago because you guys have been making waves across the international now, aren't you? Pretty much. So yeah, so that's me. So my background. So I specialize in running as a physiotherapist. Passionate runner myself, although my Strava might not look like that at the moment, but that's just, that's life. And yeah, it's just a big interest of mine. So all of my private NHS work, really, I'd say probably 80% of my patient caseload is specifically runners. And that ranges from kind of your probably Commonwealth level currently at the moment, right down to your couch to 5Ks. So anyone running is good to come and see me. And then I work NHS as well as a senior physio in the NHS, dealing with loads of stuff. But running is my thing. So today, some of you, I don't know how many were here for the last one, Katie and James. It was, I don't know when it was last year, wasn't it? It was almost a year ago, I think.
I think it was during COVID, James.
Yeah,
I think it was
a long time ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Gary would have been there.
3 pairs of alpha flies ago.
3 pairs
I
of
love
alpha.
it. So Gary is now measuring his life, his time spans in alpha flies. Goodness me. Someone's paying you too much, Gary. So yeah, so okay, so it's a long time ago, and one of the things that came out of that was the trainers side of things, and we talked about reducing running injuries, and then from that we kind of dipped into shoes. So I'm going to get straight away started on this. This is a presentation that I delivered, I think it's last year or the year before, actually. So there have been some developments in terms of trainers out there. This focuses very much on the Nike. Obviously, all other brands now have caught up. But the research hasn't changed, and what I'm going to talk about hasn't really changed. But it did take me 2 hours to deliver this presentation last time, so I am just warning you, deliberately going to skip some slides that I think are less relevant and give you guys time to ask me questions at the end, which hopefully I'll have some answers for. So let's share this. Okie dokie. Can everyone see the slide? Yep, thanks, Gary. That's brilliant. Okay, so running shoes and injury. We're going to kind of go through the history of running shoes, kind of go back in time, which is relevant in terms of the mistakes and myths that are out there now. I'm going to briefly give you a bit of a guide onto anatomy and a movement of the ankle, including pronation, what it is, whether we want it. We're going to talk about cushioning, because it often gets talked about, and look at is softer better. And the shoe, and in the shoe at this time of making this presentation, it was Nike, but I think we can probably now say the shoes. But still, you still got people out there that are very anti the shoe, so that's fine, but we'll cover that, I think, well and truly today. And then I'm going to talk about what are you looking for when you're buying a pair of shoes. And I think from this, I'm really hoping that it's nothing but a reassurance that actually shoes aren't as complicated as we are marketed to believe, I think, is the summary of this. So the history books, right? I can't see all of my slide, but I'm going to go with it anyway. So cinder tracks, back in the day, this is what a running shoe looked like. James is now looking at this thinking, oh God, I haven't got a pair of these. I need to go and get some, because he's got every pair of shoes known to man. So you quickly see him dive out the door. 1917, this material was invented, was utilized for more traction related engineering, so tires. They didn't look like that in 1917, but essentially that was used, and the sneaker was born. 1920s, these couple of youngsters got together, started making shoes. And as we'll go through here, they split. They had a big bust up, basically. Okay, they were not friends. They had a small shop, and again, long story behind it, but basically they had an argument. They split up. One created Adidas and one created Puma. 1950s and 60s, running started becoming a bit more of a big deal. Funnily enough, you think running's a big thing now. Actually, back probably maybe 30, 40 years ago, running was huge. Running was way more popular in many respects. And the likes of Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile there. And then we have this chap here, Mr. Bowman, designing a lighter, fast shoe, but no one was interested in it. No one was interested in it. 10 years later, he joined forces with Phil Knight and created BRS. Does anyone know what or has heard of BRS, Blue Ribbon Sports?
No.
Excellent. I'm trying to think where I haven't got a picture of them. So Blue Ribbon Sports, I haven't it. Do they make? No. I've got a pair of trainers of them. So they are Nike. Nike shoes. Blue Ribbon Sports was the original, the back in the day, and you'll notice that Nike occasionally bring out shoes that have the BRS logo. My branded colours for my private practice is black and yellow, and a few years ago they brought out a brilliant pair of black and yellow Nike Pegasus 37s, I think it was actually. I've still got them. I keep them as clean as possible. So Nike, 12 years later, then Nike were formed. However, Brooks were the first to use EVA. So if you're into your materials, you'll know EVA as the foam that was very often used and in still some shoes now is still used to create that cushioned foam to make things more comfortable to run in. I'd rather, going back to these, there's no EVA in there. None at all. I think the bottom of that is made of wood. And then the big thing that I want to highlight here is on that right-hand side where there. This is a paper in the American Journal of Sports Medicine, the AJSM, that linked pronation and impact forces to injury. It was a paper. It wasn't a research article. It was a journal piece, what we call an opinion piece in sort of healthcare, which is one of the lowest forms of evidence. We pretty much take no notice of it whatsoever. However, this led to what is still going on now with pronation becoming a thing. This link to a foot mechanic that is actually, what we're going to talk about later, quite normal. And the manufacturers, the companies, the shoe manufacturers thought, oh, hello, this is a good idea. Let's sell a shoe that can control something that stops runners getting injured. And off they went. And Brooks were the first to do this. So they first to use EVA, and then they started to control pronation. Interestingly, Nike were the first to produce female-specific shoes. I thought that's quite interesting. Although I know plenty of males who buy female shoes just because they like the colours. Katie and James, do you remember Ian Honeyfield? He always used to buy women's shoes. Anyway, right, so Brooks. So the technology, so this is an advert here, technology of the 80s, now available in the 40s, i.e. In the $40 there. So Brooks looking at bringing out shoes that have a roll bar they used, so trademark used, and if you can just about read that, this motion control and greater cushioning, and it kind of looking at making shoes better for athletes. In the 80s, we then see Nike Air coming out, and you probably, if anyone's seen the big documentary on Netflix, it's not that new really anymore at all, but does anyone know sort of what really propelled Nike Air forward?
James? I think James knows.
Basketball, Jordan.
Yeah.
Jordan.
Yeah, Michael Jordan. Yeah. And he was arguably probably the first sportsman or woman that was used to promote and make trainers cool. And obviously with the Air Jordan, it was huge. And to this day now, you know, he's still making and has made most of his money from Nike in one way or another. But yeah, so they bring in the air there, so they got the cushioning. If any of you can think back to those days when you might have actually had a pair of these shoes, they were pretty cool, to be fair. And then we come into the 2000s and 2010s. Okay, so you probably will recognize a couple of pictures here. Some of you will no doubt have read that book. This book, I would argue, has led to more injuries than any other book out there. It's not a bad book. In fact, it's well written, and you know, I've got nothing against Christopher McDougall for writing the book. However, it's just one of those things. I think as runners, we all want the next best thing. We want the next cool thing. We're quite keen on this sort of stuff, and this led to Vibram at the time coming out with the 5-finger minimalist shoes. Does anyone know how well that went for Vibram? Does anyone know much about the history of Vibrams that may not know this? But essentially, they got sued for a phenomenal amount of money because they were sued based on the fact that they misled the consumer to believe that their shoes would reduce injury, which I still find really odd because this still happens. And I don't, you know, I think, yeah, great, they got sued, but there's still manufacturers out there that are just, I think, flying by the skin of their teeth in misleading runners into what they can and can't do with their shoes. But Vibram got hammered for it. They're still around. I can't remember exactly what the lawsuit was, to be honest, but it was pretty big. All because they were.
Oh,
So,
sorry.
No, go, Casey. Yeah, go.
Just going to say, we've recently started a book club, so I won't add Born to Run onto our list, shall I?
Well, I think it's an interesting one, this. So I think it's actually a good book. And genuinely, it's one of those ones, if you ask a lot of runners that have read it, they love it. But I think it's like everything, we're putting into perspective that what he was seeing and in the book we know it doesn't translate. And as long as you keep that kind of in your head in terms of barefoot running is not better for performance. We know that through research, and we know that just because people would be running in bare feet if it was great. They don't. No high performance athletes do, unless they're trying to make a mark or trying to stand out from the crowd, etc. But realistically, that's not to say that barefoot running is bad, and I'd like to say that as well. Nothing against barefoot running. It's just that it's inherently a massive step away from what we are used to and our bodies are used to. So, and we know, we'll talk about probably later on, when you make any big changes to what you're wearing, but particularly what you do and how you do it in running, you are massive risk of injury because your body cannot keep up and adapt quick enough. So you go from a pair of shoes that have got a drop of say 10 mil, which is or 8 to 10 mil in most shoes, to 0. Your calf and Achilles have to then stretch and work a hell of a lot harder. So that's what we saw. We saw a dramatic increase in calf and Achilles injuries and strains. So that was the
I find
issue.
that really interesting, James, because I read Born to Run. I really enjoyed it. I didn't ever think about going down the barefoot route, but he does say something in there about finding a trainer that is comfortable for you.
Yep.
And I think, as I recall, didn't he also say something about the myth of pronation and the fact that it wasn't a thing?
This is the thing. This is why it's not a bad book, but it does talk about the barefoot running.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just where people kind of take that one thing and forget all of the other stuff that he talked about. So this is why I always kind of caveat this with saying it is a good book. It's not a book to avoid. However, this is kind of, in terms of a history, it was massively influential to what then came next.
Interesting, because I took it the other way. So that's when I remember you having this conversation previously a year ago. And I remember thinking, when I was speaking to James, I can't go in anything but the Brooks because of overpronation. I read that book and I started trying other things. I started trying Adidas, Nike, things along those lines. So I didn't actually go the conventional way by the sounds of it. I went the other way from that book.
You went rogue.
I did, yeah. Well, standard.
No, And that's good. It's interesting you should say that, actually. And I think, you know, a lot of people did, but then it's like everything. When you see a lot of people doing something, there is also a lot of people not doing that. So, you know, you were one of those, which is great. So then we stepped forward into kind of the more recent times, and we started looking at, you know, Adidas came out with the Boost foam. Then we got the presence of Hoka, which revolutionized kind of in terms of things like rocker soles and how much of a stack height that we have. They've obviously, Hoka have come on massively from, if anyone remembers when they first were around, they were quite, I used to think they were ghastly looking trainers, but now quite popular, good trainers. The only thing with Hoka though is an awful lot of them have got a very low drop, but don't look like they've got a low drop because of the heel. So I sometimes see people buying them thinking they've got a really nice big heel compared to the forefoot, but often they don't. So it's always worth looking at that drop, which we'll talk about in a bit. The Sarcones, and then also, then we go through the kind of obviously these have come on since this, but your 4%, your next percents, and then your Alpha Flies, which have arguably completely changed the world of running and pushed the boundaries. They've made the governing bodies have to change their rules and regulations in terms of stack height and what's allowed, with what manufacturers can actually do with this foam and plate. So they really have shocked the footwear world. And I mean, I think we have all had that conversation about how they've changed distance endurance running for the good, for the worst. People have their own opinions. There's one thing for sure, though, is they are here to stay, and every manufacturer out there has followed. And now we're seeing it in the track and field massively. Over the last couple of years, it really has pushed forward, and we're seeing times are tumbling, arguably a lot to do with shoes, which is just the way it is. I'm sure once someone said the same thing about a motorbike compared to a push bike. I don't know, I just made that up, actually. Okay, right. So anatomy, ankle movement. I'm not going to completely bore you with the ins and outs of the kinematics and arthrokinematics of the foot, but essentially what your foot does is it pulls up into dorsiflexion, pushes down into plantarflexion, comes in for inversion, and goes out for eversion. And that your foot does all of these in a combination of movements. It's an incredibly adaptable, complex joint. There's actually 2 joints in your ankle. So can you see my cursor if I do this? Yep. So just at the top there, so if I go kind of here, you've got your talocrural joint, which is basically where your shin bone comes into your foot, and that allows you to bring your foot up and down. And then you got your subtalar joint, which sits kind of mid-foot area, which allows that inward movement, outward movement. And that dorsiflexion, plantarflexion, mixed with inversion and eversion, allows pronation and supination to occur. And they are all vital. And as a physio, we're quite often looking at people's ranges of movement. Can they achieve good dorsiflexion and good plantarflexion? And can they achieve these movements? Because if they have stiffness or reduced movement in those planes of movement, quite often running becomes an awful lot harder, particularly if someone hasn't got good dorsiflexion. But a lot of times people miss the plantarflexion bit as well. But essentially that's your basics of how your ankle moves. So then we go on to pronation. What is it? Does anyone, I don't know how much time I've got to be asking questions, it's in my nature to do it, but yeah, anyone give me a quick shout out what they think pronation is before I ramble on? 3, 2, 1. Okay, right. So pronation, it is normal. This is one of the biggest things, and I'm the more I do this presentation, the more I am starting to see people already know this, which is absolutely brilliant, because it saves me having this conversation with people when they come in to see me, and almost having to persuade people that it's normal because they've just been told over and over again, whether it be shoe shops, shoe manufacturers, etc., internet, runners' world, whatever you might want to go down the route of in terms of literature. It still is out there as a myth, but pronation is normal. It's essential for you to be able to walk, run, and be bipedal and be able to move. It allows you to take the forces that are coming in from the ground and spread them across the foot into the ankle and then up the lower limb, and it makes you efficient. So your pronation is essentially where you come across. So you've landed on the ground, your foot rolls over, and as you go over, coming up onto your toes, your foot will go out and then it will come in. And you'll see that. We'll do some videos in a minute in terms of what that looks like. Oh, here we are. So hopefully you should be able to see this. So if we watch these feet, these are, you hopefully recognize these, most of these guys here. But if you watch, his foot comes up and then goes across, and some of them do it more than others. They are all pronating because they have to pronate. You can usually see it at the front crease where they fall in and it comes across. So if you look at this chap here, as he comes down, so he comes into a heel strike. First of all, that's something else to notice. Goes on the outside, and then you'll see just there, it's squishing down on the inside, and he's coming in to pronation to then toe off. And pronation enables you to come across onto your big toe. And your big toe is big for a reason. It gives you a large platform. It's got your flexor hallucis longus muscle, which flexes your big toe, pushes it down into the ground, is much stronger than any of your other toes. So without pronation, you're not going to come across onto your big toe. You don't get that strong push off there. You don't get that ability to push off from the biggest part of your foot. If you supinate and you don't come across into pronation, you're going to be pushing off your little toe. We could probably all agree that pushing off your little toe is not going to be that efficient. So that's those guys there. So can we and should we change it? So realistically, around, and this is maximum, depending on what literature you look at, a maximum of 10% of the population truly excessively pronate. And when we say excessively pronate, to a point whereby we do need to adjust it. And that 10% includes people with neurological conditions. So they're probably not running anyway, some of those people. And there is literally no link between pronation and injury. The only slight link that has been found is that pronation has been linked to protective nature. So those of us who pronate slightly more are actually reducing our chances of injury. Only when we go to this excessive, very small part of the population do we see any link with injury with excessive pronation. But as I say, there is tiny amount of people. And you are not going to have that identified by a shoe shop. You're going to have that identified, probably not even by someone like me. You're going to have that identified by a specialist MSK podiatrist. Foot type and posture. Who has seen this? Foot arch types. This doesn't happen very much now, although I have recently seen it from a shoe manufacturer still. I think it's Asics, actually. They still have this on their website, which is absolutely shocking in my opinion. But you may have heard of the wet foot test. Again, not really used anymore. You used to be told to get a piece of paper, wet the bottom of your foot, and then tread on the piece of paper. And depending on what mark you left, it told you whether you needed a neutral or motion control or stability shoe. Absolute rubbish. Arches have no way of telling you pronation, because we should hopefully by now. Pronation is a dynamic movement as well. Pronation doesn't happen when you're standing still on a piece of paper. So you can't tell whether you pronate or not by standing still. It just tells you you've got a high arch, which is just an anatomical variance. Everyone's slightly different. So this is looking at shoe type and foot posture. So we're looking at, can we change that pronation? So this was a massive study. So for those of you who probably don't know, but meta-analysis, so what that basically means is it's where they take lots of smaller studies, and we're talking lots. So this is 4,000 individuals across different studies. They're not only group them together, but they also then can carry out statistical data analysis on that information because the information is very similar in terms of the way it's collected. So this was massive. And the good thing about military personnel is they obviously all run in part of their training, but they can also control for things like training load, diet, environment, background. There's lots about the environment of a military personnel that is very, very similar and quite controlled, as controlled as we possibly could be with any population. And they categorize the runners or these personnel into archetype and fitted them with shoes according to the archetype. So they basically did this and said, right, okay, for those of you who have got a high arch, we are not going to do anything. And those who are flat pronation, right, you need a stability shoe. Okay, so controls, and yeah, so the control groups were given motion control shoes regardless, and they found absolutely no effect on injury rates. So essentially what they're saying here is by giving individuals a shoe based on their foot type and their foot posture made absolutely no difference on injury rates. And this hasn't really been, well, they don't need to reproduce this study because it's massive. Just to add on this one here as well, be careful not to ramble on, but there's also a really good study where, and I love this one because it's absolutely evil. Well, it's not evil, but what they did is they looked at, they got a group of people barefoot, and they put pins not into the foot, because obviously your skin and muscles move around your bone. They put pins into people's foot bones. They then got them to walk or run. Obviously, they put them in places where it's not painful, but they got them to walk and run, looked at how they move, put them into shoes that should change how they run, and within a few hundred meters, they reverted back to the way they normally run. So the shoes made no difference to the way their foot moved. Their feet went back to what their foot felt was the most efficient. Just going to cover, I'm going to breeze past this one because wear patterns on shoes, we don't use it. So many people still bring their trainers into me as a physio and say, well, I thought you'd want to see this. And I entertain it, but you don't. It doesn't really tell you anything at all. People have varying different ways of wearing a shoe based on what surfaces they run on, have their stride length, their stride width, their cadence, the material the shoes are made of. There really is not much that can actually tell you. So if anyone looks at the pair of shoes and goes, ooh, that's just as bad as going to a garage and them looking under the bonnet and doing that. So it's very, very not a useful thing. Okay, cushioning. I know I'm flying through all this now. So if anyone's got any questions, you can shout out. I'm going to come back to questions later though anyway. Cushioning. So what does cushioning do? Has anyone got a quick fire answer to what cushioning might do in a pair of shoes?
Does it reduce the impact?
David's going with reducing impact. Good one, David. I'm glad you said that.
I'm waiting for you to say it's wrong now.
Why would you say that, David? Come on.
Just the way you said it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, obviously. Okay, yeah, well, we'll go on to it. So cushioning is, and to this day you will, and it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You think, well, okay, I need to reduce the impact that comes through into my leg, into my body, because I've got shin splints. Really good example. So your medial tibial stress syndrome or shin splints. I want a softer shoe so it feels better. So I'm putting less force through my foot and my leg. Okay, so cushioning and impact forces. Unfortunately, the opposite occurs. And this is, I'd still find this mad, but it's been very, very highly evidenced. So when comparing cushioned shoes or expensive, there's a few studies here, but they've looked at expensive shoes rather than cheaper shoes. They found the impact forces are higher in the expensive, well-cushioned shoe. Barefoot running over different surfaces found that softer surfaces, we run further to front. So our foot changes the way we run on those surfaces. And then a study relatively recently, in scale of things, 5 years ago, looked at some of the highly cushioned shoes, and these are the Hoka, and found the impact forces were much higher in the more cushioned shoe. Now, has anyone got anything does that seem a bit weird, or does that seem normal?
I'm just upset I've got to throw some of my shoes away.
No, you don't have to throw them away. It's good. It's good. Force it, and this was everything. The later on we look, forces that come through the body doesn't come through to injury anyway. Actually, so it's kind of irrelevant. But basically, what we're looking at here is your body is way more cleverer than you. All right. Essentially, what you're doing is your body has an awful lot of mechanisms to preempt and alter the way it moves based on what it is about to do or feel or experience. And it's a bit like we say that a lot of our body sits in the future because it's preempting, it's filling in the gaps. It's a bit like, there's lots of things where they've done, you can do these tricks with the mind whereby you can read a piece of writing and there's words missing, but you'll still fill in those words. You will think you've seen those words. And that's because our mind very much fills in gaps for us. And a lot of that feeds into our motor skills and how we move. So again, this is another thing, just that impact forces do not correlate to injury rate. So although cushion shoes don't reduce the impact, they increase the impact. Well, because impact doesn't increase injury, then doesn't matter. What we're saying is you don't need to go and buy a new pair of shoes because you think you want to reduce the impact. So don't go and buy cushion shoes for that. Just stick with the shoes you've got. And the reason is the body adapts. So it does this before your foot's even hit the ground. So your body is looking at the ground and thinking, okay, I'm running on grass. Whoa, fantastic. That's nice and soft. I don't need to do anything biomechanically to reduce that impact because the ground is already soft. I'm running in a pair of nice soft shoes. Within a few steps, your brain will notice that softness and your body will go, brilliant, fantastic. The shoes are doing it for me. I'll increase the stiffness of my lower limb because stiffness is efficient. So this reaction happens in less than 100th of a second before your initial contact. So initial contact is where your heel hits the ground. So 100th of a second before that, your body has reacted to what is about to happen. And it takes into account the surface, the environment, the cushioning on your shoe, and the shape of that shoe as well. So on soft ground or soft shoes, your body allows a greater degree of leg stiffness. I'm jumping ahead a bit here, but and as I say, stiffness in your lower limb is efficient because stiffness allows you to store energy. So if you have a stiff Achilles, that's a good thing because because it stores energy. So if you've got, so I've got a band here, okay, stretchy band. So if this is a really, really floppy band, got one somewhere around, and when I let go, a floppy band's going to go meh, like that. Meh. If I've got a really stiff band, so if I shorten it and I do this, it does an awful lot more recoil. There's more energy stored in a stiff band than there is a soft band, or that soft band has to be stretched a lot more to get that stiffness. That's a sort of analogy. The biomechanist would kill me for saying stuff like that, but essentially that's sort of the premise of it. And even with motion control shoes, our bodies have a preferred movement path. This is what I was talking about, those pins in the bones. You can put someone in a certain type of shoe, but your body, your foot will always revert back to the path of least resistance or the most efficient path for it. Remember, we are all totally different, our anatomy. So we will have so Katie and James sitting there will have a different number of bones in their body, will have a different number of muscles. James will have muscles. No, Katie's definitely got muscles that James hasn't got. So it's one of those things whereby we are just really different. And I think as runners, we need to embrace that way more and stop comparing ourselves to each other, because we're very individual and what's right for you is not going to be right for someone else. And your body will just plow on anyway. Heel strike. So this is another one that is demonized. I quite often hear this. I hate to say it, but I hear it from running coaches a lot still. Oh, that person's heel striking. We need to stop that. Well, you don't need to stop heel strike because heel strike is really quite key. Yes, some people heel strike less and appear to sit through on their midfoot, but it's really normal. As they say, 70% of runners, including elite athletes, will have a noticeable heel strike. I think, is this a video? How do I move this out of the way? Come on. Yeah, it's a video. So you can see here. I want to get back to this bit here, but you can just see, oh, for goodness sake. It's pretty obvious anyway, but there is a difference between, can I go forward? There, okay. However, does anyone know what we do look at rather than heel strike? What we look at rather than heel strike, what are we more, not concerned, but we might take notice of?
Contact a little bit in front of the body mass.
Yeah. And what would we class that as?
Overreaching or overstriding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So overreaching, overstriding. So if you've got a heel strike, well, no, if you overstride or your, as James said there, your heel, your initial contact is quite far in front of your pelvis, that does increase issues or can increase issues. But again, it's not about the forces, because we know forces coming through the body don't increase injury. But yeah, so heel strike and overstriding are not to be mistaken. And as a coach, you will quite often rightly get someone to try and bring that landing, that initial contact underneath the pelvis. It makes sense really, because you're not braking, you're propelling yourself forward. But it's not the heel strike that's the problem. It's the overstriding. The heel strike itself is very, very normal. So it's more important to look at where is that landing, like James rightly said there, and you'd expect from a running coach of his caliber, is that we're looking more in terms of where's that landing. You can see there's still a gap, and in this probably 200-300th of a second, that foot's going to get to here before it makes full initial contact. And she might overstride a little bit anyway, and that's not necessarily a problem unless she's getting issues.
Was that not discussed in a book as well, James? Heel strike. Was it Running with the Kenyans?
Running with the Kenyans, yeah. That's taking me back a bit. Sometimes I think I need to read these books again because it's been such a long time. I can't actually remember. Okay, fab. So that's her running along. Old Thoughts Die Hard. So again, and this is just going back. This is the wait, it wasn't a study. I don't know why I put that. It's not a study. Injury to runners, and it was just a piece. This is what I was talking right at the back. Right back along in terms of what was said in this piece in the American journal here. And again, what that did then is it snowballed into a whole marketing storm. And if you think about it, if you're a shoe manufacturer and you need to differentiate yourself from all of the other running shoe manufacturers, what are you going to do? You're going to find things that are innovative, that are going to stop someone getting injured. Wow, brilliant, fantastic. I want a pair of those shoes, which makes sense. You would want a pair of those shoes if it were true. And I think in the chat, someone's put about Brooks, and yeah, I think Brooks are still a bit. But to be fair, the one manufacturer that really are not into this is Nike, to be honest. And I am a bit of a Nike whore, but they are at least don't. I do sometimes think their marketing's more ethical, more moral. I don't know, but I think they actually do is they just put way more money into it, and they've got that marketing side of it in terms of being cool rather than being a certain technology. But then they've got the back of the 4%, next sense, Alpha Flies, etc. now, so they're kind of made for a bit. But I think they're gonna have to work hard to keep the others at bay, if you ask me, because they have caught up and are winning races. So shoe drop. I would say that of anything that shoes do in terms of injury, from my point of view as a physio, shoe drop is probably the one thing I would suggest people look at. And certainly not that one is better than the other. It's just a dramatic change from one to the other can cause people issues. So the things I recommend is do be aware of the drop that your shoe is, and be aware of the drop of the shoe that you're going to buy. So if you're running in a pair of shoes that have a 4 mil drop, which a lot of the Hokas do, and that's fine. But if you're running in a pair of shoes, say for instance some of the Nikes run off around 12 mil, not so much anymore. They have actually dropped them down a bit. But say sort of 10 mil, if you go from one of those 10 mil drops to a 4 mil drop and you do it straight, one, high mileage to a high mileage week, the chances are your posterior, your calf and your Achilles are not going to be too happy. It's not to say you're going to get an injury, but I have seen people bring about Achilles tendinopathy from what I can pretty much assume is to do with the shoe drop, because their training load may have just about stayed okay, but then they increase the load on the Achilles and calf by dropping that shoe drop. And so therefore the load coming through the back of the calf and Achilles is increased at the time when you are running a fair bit. And we know that changes in load are the thing that most often cause injuries. So the shoe, how am I doing? Okay, I'm going to need to be quick now. So this is, to be fair, this is a bit outdated, some of this, because obviously the shoe is not the shoe anymore. It is the shoes. And to be honest, I would safely say I have not kept up with all of the different brands now and what they're doing. But essentially, they've all cottoned on to the same thing in terms of this foam and plate combination. So what's the big deal? Well, essentially, at the time, if you take this back before some of those, it worked. And regardless of what people said, oh no, it's not the shoe, it's all marketing hype. It wasn't marketing hype. It worked. That shoe worked. That 4% shoe that first came out, were by Nike before the Alpha Flyers, before the Next Percents. That 4% shoe was revolutionary. There was evidence and research that Nike did. Actually, the evidence, that the research that they did was really well done. They knew what they were doing. They thought, well, we know our shoe works. Let's put some good research together because we're confident it works. And that's what they did. But then it was replicated. And that's the most important thing in science. When you do research, it's can you replicate that research and show the same results? And they did, if not more. So independent research showed up to a 7%. Wait, this is actually not right, actually. It was around 7%. Some runners experienced a 12% increase in running economy just by wearing a pair of Vaporflies. So it was significant. It was massive. But when you get this kind of thing, people start asking questions and they don't like it. People don't like it. People don't like it now because of the change it's had in athletics and what it's done to the legacy of other previous performances and previous individual athletes. So as I say, it was not just funded by Nike, but other people did it too. So to think to think they don't make a huge difference is like thinking the earth is flat. Please tell me no one here is a flat earther, because that's going to be well awkward. So, and at the time, if you remember it, I don't, this is going back, I just found this fascinating. Athletes that were sponsored by other shoes went to extreme lengths to wear them, so much so that they used to rebrand the Nike with Adidas stripes. They made them look like other things. And it actually turns out that, I think it was New Balance and Adidas actually did it for them. So it wasn't the athletes that were doing it. It was the brand. It was the trainer that were doing it. So, there was some extreme lengths that were going to make them win. And the only way they could do it was by wearing that shoe. So what makes them effective? I've got to hear, marketing, all this sort of stuff. It is, if you think you're wearing something fantastic, you probably will run better. Belief is a massive psychological gain. And that's, I'm sure, what James and Katie do an awful lot in terms of the coaching side of things is enabling you to have self-efficacy, and believing in yourself is a massive part of performing well as an athlete. And putting on a pair of shoes that you believe are going to make you quicker probably will make you quicker regardless. But you've got the plate and the foam, and a lot of people attributed the performance gains to the plate, and it really wasn't the plate. The plate made a difference in terms of what it allowed them to do with this, and this was the foam. This is this Zoom X foam that they put in, and this foam was the big deal. This is the energy return foam that they needed, but they needed stack height. They needed a big amount of this foam to make the difference. And the only way you can keep the rigidity and stiffness of the shoe with that much foam is to put a carbon plate in it. But how sexy does it sound when you put a carbon plate in a pair of shoes? Sounds cool, sounds quick, and they went with that. People, that's what they kind of let happen. And they have since used that carbon plate to create stiffness. And like I said before, in the lower limb, stiffness is efficient, stores energy. So it helped with that. But it's essentially the 4% were very much about the foam. Very much about the foam. Carbon plate foam. And again, like I said here, they use that foam, that plate to increase that stack height. Right, rustling through. I think you've probably got to have shoes and injury. They don't go hand in hand. Foot type doesn't increase injury. They don't control the movement of the foot. And in many cases, we don't want to control that foot movement. It's your friend. Pronation is key. It's important. It's great. So I'm not going to go through this because this is another one for another time, but 6% of running injuries are linked to just basically training errors. So get yourself a good coaching network, good coaches, and you're much less likely to get injured, much less likely, as long as you listen to them. There was a new bit of evidence came out this last couple of months. Big study that's actually the first study to really show that strength training reduces running injury. Up until now, the jury's been out. There's not been any really conclusive evidence until now. But it's really interesting because they did a subgroup analysis on it, and it showed that it was only the ones that were highly compliant in that strength training that reduced their injuries. And I think the same is for coaching. You can have the best coach in the world, but if you don't listen to them, awkward. Right. Okay. So what are you looking for in a pair of shoes? I'm doing a count time. So these are the only things you really need to worry about. I mentioned drop height. Don't suddenly go from one to the other. So just be aware of it. But you want a pair of shoes that are comfortable. Comfort really still is our main predictor of a shoe that you're going to get on with. Weight. So shoes that are more comfortable linked to low injury risk. Yes, so I've kind of, but weight. So for every 100 grams of weight in a shoe, there's a potentially approximately, lost. It's a 1% reduction in efficiency, no increase. So if you add 100 grams, you reduce the efficiency of that shoe by 1%. And that's mainly because of your lever, your moment arm. So if there's any physicists here, they're going to be like, well, he's not right there. But the basic premise is the further away from the muscle working that the weight is, the heavier that weight becomes. And the shoe is at the end of your leg. So you put weight on the end of your leg, it becomes a much bigger deal. So it's not where you want to put the weight. Put the weight in your pocket maybe, but not on the shoe. That's not to say you need the lightest pair of shoes, but it is a consideration. And then look, I think that's quite important. This is something I've added in, really. There's no research behind this, but I think James will definitely agree with this. I think having a pair of shoes that you love the look of, that you enjoy running in, means you're going to run more. You're going to enjoy running. And isn't running about enjoyment? What, foremost? Absolutely. So they should look cool. And then a big one is they should fit your price point. You do not want to be putting shoes on, if you can't afford a pair of shoes, you don't need them. You don't. They're not going to help in terms of injury. Yeah, performance-wise at the very top end, you are probably looking at slightly better performance, but you don't need to, buy the pair of shoes you can afford is always my advice. How often you should change them. So there's no definitive answer to this, but there's a prediction of around 250 to 1,000 kilometers. So you're probably thinking, hang on a minute, that's massive. Kind of just is the way it is. But around 500 kilometers, the peak pressure coming through the bottom of your foot is increased by 100%, doubles at 50 kilometers. And if you were back in the day with EVA, obviously we're not really seeing much EVA now, but that is impaired at around 750 kilometers. These are way bigger numbers that most people change their shoes. James gets to what? Was it about 20, 30 miles, is it, James, before you change them?
If they last.
But yeah, I mean, my recommendation usually to people is to go around about 250, 300 miles, and you're probably thinking about getting another pair while they're on offer. That's what I always say to people. Start looking for shoes before you need them, get them cheap, and then you can transition into them. You can then have two pairs while the one pair is kind of weaning out. You've got another pair to kind of move into. However, as I say, the evidence is not really there, and I've seen many people wearing shoes and they've done over 1,000 miles in them, no problems at all. They're few and far between, and they look ridiculous because their toes are hanging out the end. But don't be forced to by what the manufacturers say. You've got a pair of shoes. If they're feeling a bit clunky and you want a new pair, or you've seen a new pair that you want, just go buy them. That was that. I'm actually quite impressed that I've done that. I did it way too quickly, and I probably skipped bits I shouldn't have. But any questions?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. This is probably like more so from.
Careful, James, because when you talk about cost, Katie's questions normally cost me money.
Okay. So I think this will be a good question for general, like, people within the community. So what we find, obviously, is that a lot of people within the community have been in here for a long time and have spoken a lot to us as coaches or James about shoes and have shoe rotations. What would your advice be to someone that's like quite a new runner and maybe only has like one pair of shoes? What should then that runner be looking for next for their shoe rotation? Because I think like as a beginner,
Yep.
they have like one pair of shoes and they have that same model and just keep rebuying. What should then be their next steps to then maybe start a shoe rotation?
I think it's a really good question, because I didn't put it into here, there is some evidence that having a rotation can slightly reduce injury risk. The evidence isn't great for it, so I'm a bit hesitant on that. But my advice is, if you can, look at the stack height, the drop. So if you're going to buy a different brand, just keep an eye on that drop, make sure that's not massive. But my advice is to have a different brand and have a different model, because then you're stressing your foot and your ankle in a slightly different way in each of the runs. So you're spreading the load essentially, rather than having the same forces coming through the body all of the time through one pair of shoes. But then looking back at what I've just talked about, those forces don't matter and your body does things its own way anyway. So I could just contradict myself a little bit. But my advice is, and what I do personally, I have Nike and Adidas, and I've got two pairs that I like for both of those, and that's kind of what I rotate round. But if you're a new runner and you've got a pair of shoes, again, it's finding something that's got roughly the same drop as the shoe that you've got, which you can easily find by Googling it, and find something that's comfortable, you like the look of, that's within your price range, and not overthink it, I suppose, is my main thing of it. Don't overthink it.
Okay. I did have another question, but Penny's kind of got a question which follows on quite nicely from the last one. So Penny's put, I'm currently in Brooks, which have a 12mm drop. Could I potentially go down to 10, because a pair that had 8 caused her a bit of issues with her calves before?
Yeah, definitely. So I think 12 till 10 shouldn't give you too many problems. Do you know what? And what I would do is, and what I didn't really say so much in the presentation, was you can go from a 12 to a 0, as long as you build up the capacity of your calf and Achilles to cope with it. So if you're going to change shoes to a 12 to a 10, it's a really good opportunity to make sure that your strength and conditioning is on point and get your calf muscle to be nice and strong. So single leg calf raises off a step, and making sure that you can do 20 or more of those single leg calf raises off a step. That's going to give you a good indication that your calf has got a good amount of capacity, and it will be more than able to cope with a 2mm drop. And I'd say that you could probably do that regardless. 2mm is not hugely significant, but as a percentage, when we look at it as a percentage, actually it's quite a lot. It's it's over 20% difference. So you could argue in that way it's a lot, but no, I don't think you should be too bad, Penny. But I would get on that step, do some single leg calf raises. I think I covered those last times. I think I was challenged to do some and I never did. Oh.
Yeah,
never came back.
Yeah, I don't think that did. Another question, again, I think is kind of relevant to quite a lot of people. Carbon plated shoes. So people start buying them and start using them and realize how good they feel, and probably then start using them in sessions and speed work. Can you wear carbon shoes too often? Which then, because I know that kind of, you said that shoes don't always kind of cause injuries, but can wearing carbon plated shoes too often not be good for training?
I think if you're used to wearing them and you ease into them, there's no reason why not. But I think you only have to put on a pair of Alpha Flies compared to a pair of Pegasus to feel how different those shoes feel. So to then suddenly then start training in them all of the time, that's going to potentially be an issue because they're just very, very different, and they're forcing your foot into a very different position. So that sudden change. But if you were to gradually introduce them into your training, it's an expensive way of training. But essentially, I wouldn't be able to say you shouldn't, or that it's going to cause injuries. The only thing I would say on a caveat to that, there is at the moment a move that there's research going on at the moment to look to see the long-term effects of these carbon plated shoes, because there is a slight concern that they are having an effect on the forefoot, so the spread of the feet. I don't know, there's no more information to come out about that at all. That's just, the jury's out on that one there. I think part of it's people want to find something wrong with them. But I personally would want to have a different pair of shoes to train and to race in, to train fast in, to run easy in. I think it's healthy to have that difference, but I wouldn't say it's essential. If that's
because that's it. I think sometimes as well, like and I personally have this too, is that I love to wear sort of like fast shoes in sessions because you get that feeling and you feel fast and your legs feel good.
Yeah.
But then also what I trying to steer clear of as well is that actually then you want to save that feeling for race day. So if you then and I think sometimes people kind of just think, oh, these shoes feel great, so I'm just going to keep wearing them in training. And then sometimes when we start speaking with clients and understand what shoes they're wearing for different sessions, we're like, okay, well actually maybe save, like have a race day shoe and then have a shoe for faster training, so that then as well you get that extra edge. Because I've done it myself where I've just kind of, I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling as good at the moment, so I'm going to put on my faster shoes. It'll make me feel good in sessions.
Totally.
And the other day put on a
I would agree with that completely. I think although you could argue that you could transition to wearing those fast shoes all the time, my question would be, why would you want to? Because it's a very expensive way of wearing out a pair of shoes. But also, like I think most rightly say, I save them for the day. Save those shoes that make you feel on top of the world and fast as hell for race day. I mean, I used to love actually when Nike had they had the turbos. Do you remember the Nike turbos? I used to love those because they sat just in the middle, and I think Nike have tried to do that a bit elsewhere. I don't know what other brands have done, but I love that because that gave me the turbo was my training shoe, was my fast tempo, was my rep shoe, and it was great because it still had substance to it. It wasn't massively different. It was just a bit quicker, or felt a bit quicker, but I still kept that 4% Alpha Fly, next percent, etc. for race day. And I would agree with you that, Katie. I'd back that point of view 100%.
Yeah. I mean, I personally didn't have a pair of turbos, but anyone that I've spoken to that have had a pair of turbos are like devastated that they'd like discontinued them.
Yeah.
Sammy is one of them.
The reason they did that is because the shoe that their sales went massive and they weren't selling their top end shoes, because everyone realized that the turbo was actually almost as good and they raced in them because they were half the cost. And so I don't know how true that is, but I think there's probably a lot of substance behind that. They were selling them like hotcakes, but they weren't selling their top end shoe because people didn't need them. The turbo was good enough. So yeah, that's potentially that. They were amazing. I have actually still got a pair of them. They're not good for running anymore though. They're my gardening shoes.
Cool.
Can I ask a question about plates, if that's possible, James? So
Go
what's
for
the
it, David.
difference between
Yeah.
a nylon plate and a carbon plate? I know it's different material, but it seems like some Saucony, for instance, seem to be concentrating on nylon plates.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I don't. I'm not a material engineer or anything like that.
Expert.
But no. I mean, it's so one of the reasons is going to be differentiating themselves in the market,
Yeah.
100%. Because if you can't beat them, then or not.
Try something
Say
else.
can't beat
Yeah.
them, join them. But can't beat them, do something different. But also, nylon does have really good energy storage properties. When woven in the right way, and when you look into the nylon and how they're doing it, it's about the weave. But that, yeah, I think it's much of a muchness, and there's nothing to say that one's better than the other, as far as I'm aware. But I may be wrong. As I say, it's not. That starts going into the depths of material science, which is not my forte as such.
No worries, I appreciate it.
I think in the Saucony version there, they use nylon in the sort of training shoe, mainly down to cost. It's a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So the Saucony training shoe has nylon, which, as I say, is a little bit cheaper to manufacture.
Yeah.
Slightly heavier, but then their premium shoe has then got the carbon, which is obviously more expensive, lighter, got that little bit more rigidity. But
is that the Pro or the Elite, James?
Both the Elite and the Pro are carbon.
Carbon, fine. Thanks, mate.
And then you see this in other things. So you see this in cycling as well, whereby they hold something back for their top end. So you do see this in, especially in cycling, for component parts, and again, it's part of a brand marketing as well. So to enable you to differentiate your top end to be able to sell it at top price is always good as well from a point of view of a business making money, which at the end of the day they've all got to do, which is cool.
I posted it in the chat earlier, but my dad actually last week sent us there was a documentary on BBC Two called The Secret Genius of Modern Life Trainer, and it's really interesting actually because it's about the evolution of the trainer and the materials. So David, that could be just, and it's an interesting watch because it
absolutely,
it was about, I think there was 6 different things and she did different technology things, but the trainer just ironically was one of them. And at one point she was like cutting the trainer apart to show you like the outsole, the midsole.
Very sad.
Yeah. But yeah, that was just an interesting kind of extra thing if anyone wanted to watch that about that. Has anyone got any more questions? Because obviously we are running over time, but I'm sure James is happy to answer one or two more.
Can I just sneak in one more, and if that's okay? It's the OOFs question. So those recovery shoes, do you know much about those? Are they actually beneficial?
I think no. So in terms of actually what they're doing, no, not at all. However, they feel amazing. They do feel comfy. And so I used to have a pair of Salomon when they used to do the what was it called, the React, don't know, same sort of thing. And I loved finishing a race and putting them on. It was the best feeling in the world. So as point of view of recovery, it couldn't be further down on my list in terms of things that are going to have an effect on your recovery. However, things that feel good. So, and yeah, that's fine. But no, there's no kind of actual definitive yes, they will help you recover quicker.
Perfect, thank you. I'll be quiet now.
James, is there an optimal stack height?
Oh, they're going to go into a whole new. There's some really good. I wonder if I can maybe signpost you guys to some of this. I think some of you might actually be interested in it. So the thing that the governing body. So oh God, who govern road running?
What, England Athletics?
No, bigger than that. The world.
Okay.
I think it'll be World Athletics. I think it'll be, or something like that. But either way, they have governed stack height. So that's what you now see. So what they've done is sorry, James?
IAAF.
IAAF, that's it. Yeah. So they have governed that. So what they're doing there is they're saying, yeah, okay, this is what you've got to work in, and you can do all your hokey pokey magicy stuff, but you've only got this. Because what it is, like I said earlier on, that is the stack height. The bigger you go, and they were going massive. There was a pair of shoes. What was it? Can't remember. But it was actually illegal, so they weren't legal. Pardon?
Primex. The Adidas Primex.
So I'm not sure. The Nike also had a pair as well, and they weren't legal in IAAF races. So if you were to even your kind of like Reading half marathon, etc. You weren't allowed in theory to wear them, so because the stack height was too big. But stack height
changed the rules recently that those stack height rules are now for elite and sub elite. So
yeah, exactly, yeah. So they're so but then it's going to affect if you win.
Yeah,
it's going to affect. Yeah, but that's so essentially. So from a point of view of what's the optimal stack height, they've never found out because they've never been allowed to. But it's a case of how high can you go before you lose the stability of the shoe, and that was partly. So you'll also see some of the shoes. What they did is you had the upper, and then they splayed out onto the sole because again they want that stack height, but they need that stability. So you started to see that in some shoes. I'm just looking around my shoes here, no, but yeah. So they started doing that.
So Adidas are now playing on that. So the Primex Strung 2 is just released, and they're advertising that as so good it's illegal. It's got 2 plates in it, 50mm stack.
Brilliant. I think it's great. I think it's fun. I think it's it's some people still don't like it, but it's
Evolution.
it is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly that. So we're not going to stop it. That's for sure.
Anybody else any more? Penny did put a question about flat feet, but I think you answered that pretty much straight away. Did that answer that for you, Penny?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, flat feet. I get so many people coming into clinic saying, I know I've got flat feet, so that's probably what the cause is. And as soon as you get them to stand on their toes, their arch goes bing, and they've not got flat feet. A lot of people have been told at some point they've got flat feet, usually by someone who hasn't got a clue what they're talking about and shouldn't be given that kind of advice.
Mine was when I was 11 years old at the school medical by the doctor.
Yep. and it stays with you, doesn't it, Penny, as well?
Absolutely, yeah. It was the most humiliating experience ever.
Absolutely. And this is a thing in healthcare which really riles me and I get quite angry with, is when these bits of information come out from people who don't know enough to be given the information, they don't realize the damage it can do. The things we say to our patients, and we talk about this a lot in healthcare now, the things we say, the words we use can last a lifetime, and have hugely detrimental effects on people and their beliefs on what's going on in their bodies. So hopefully you've come through the other side, Penny, if that is the case for you.
Absolutely. This has been a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. I've learned loads.
Oh, thank you,
Penny. I bet you Penny's been taking lots of notes as well, haven't you, Penny?
Might have been.
No, I love it. Penny's always taken notes. It makes me feel really good because she's sitting there and I feel like if any time I've been saying something and she's taking loads of notes, I'm like, oh, I'm saying something good because she's writing it down.
It's brilliant. I mean, and I suppose on that note, because obviously we're coming to the end now, I've put on my points there, and that's not a promo at all. That's more to say you can get in contact with me. If you've got any questions about what we've done tonight, or you disagree and you don't feel comfortable saying it in front of a crowd, I'm more than happy to have those conversations. And you can catch me at any one of those bits and pieces there and ask the question. And if there's things you want me to cover around sort of this or anything to do with related anyway to do with physio, I'm more than happy to come and do these for you guys and James and Katie, because it's more, I enjoy doing it, and it's good to get this information out to people, and if it's worthwhile and useful, I'm more than happy to do more.
Brilliant. Thank you very much again, James, from me and Katie and everybody here. I'm sure everyone's got to go and hide their bank cards now for the next 24 hours or so. And yeah, we'll definitely like to have you on again at some point, and go, especially for that gait cycle stuff you were talking to us beforehand.
Yeah, if we really want to geek out, we can go through gait analysis and gait cycle. I've just recently done a master's module on pathomechanics of gait and balance, so I can really geek out on it if you want me to, but we'll see. That might be a more select niche one, but yeah, we can call.
I think we'll all enjoy that. So yeah, everyone go and give James a follow. Make sure his follows go up on Instagram today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
James.
Thanks, James.
Cheers, Gary. Cheers, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
See you.
See you in Berlin, Gary.
Yeah, I'll be there.
I hope so.
Bye.
Love it.